So chapter 14 covers long-term liabilities, specifically notes payable and bonds payable. But in this video, I'm going to be covering notes payable. Now, although this is a video on long-term notes payable doesn't necessarily have to be long-term. They can also be short-term, meaning that you can take out a note and that note could be just for 3 months, or it can be for 6 months, or it can be for 9 months. If that's the case, then that is a short-term notes payable. So it doesn't necessarily, again, have to be long-term. But chapter 14 does cover long-term liabilities. So what is a note? A note is a loan that's from the bank. So specifically, when it comes to a note is a legal document. It's a legal agreement between the lender and the borrower that specifies the amounts that's borrowed and also the interest that's tacked on to or assigned to that principal balance or amount that's being borrowed by the borrower. And so when it comes to that, a note is issued from the borrower in exchange for cash that is received from the lender. And so with that, the note requires periodic payments that covers the principal balance and interest. So the cash payment that's being made by the borrower is going to not only pay for the interest, so cover the interest, but also the principal loan amount that's on that note. So when it comes to the issuance of a note, the borrower and the lender will have to record a journal entry into their books or into the systems. But since we're talking about liabilities, long-term liabilities, we're only focused on the borrower's books. So when it comes to the borrower is going to record the issuance of the note by debiting cash, which is the cash amount or the amount that's received from the lender. And the corresponding account that's affected is going to be a liability account. In this case, notes payable. So the credit is going to go to notes payable. So here's an example of a notes payable transaction here. So on January 1st, Frank borrows $60,000 from a bank to purchase equipment. Okay, so Frank borrows, so Frank is the borrower. So Frank signs an 8% installment note requiring 3 annual payments of $23,282 that covers the principal plus interest. Okay, so to record the issuance of the note on January 1st, Frank will need to first debit cash for $60,000. That's the principal amount. So by debiting cash, since cash is an asset, that's going to increase the balance in the cash account. And Frank will also need to credit, same transaction, credit notes payable, which is a liability account, by $60,000. And by crediting this liability account, you are increasing the balance in that account. So that's just recognizing that the cash that's received, it is a loan that needs to be paid back by Frank in the future. So as you can see here, before we move on to the next slide, in this scenario here, it says that he signs an 8% installment note requiring 3 annual payments of $23,282. So that's the cash payment that Frank is going to be making to cover the principal and the interest. And these payments are going to be made 3 times because it lets us know that the payments are annual or 3 annual payments of $23,282. Okay. So payments of principal and interest. So on January 1st, this is the same scenario here. Frank borrows $60,000 from a bank to purchase equipment. He signs an 8% installment note requiring 3 annual payments of $23,282 that covers the principal plus interest. So we got 2 steps here. So the first step is to calculate the interest expense for the first year. So the interest expense for the first year, to determine what that is, you're going to take $60,000, which is the principal balance, multiplied by 8%, which is the interest rate that's provided to us. That gives us $4,800 of interest for the first year. Step 2, we're going to have to determine what amount of the cash payment of $23,282 will go towards the note, which is the principal amount for the first year. So by doing that, you're going to take $23,282, which is the cash payment that is made by Frank, subtracted from the $4,800 of interest expense that was determined in step one. Then that's when you get $18,482. So that amount is what's going to decrease the balance in the notes payable account. Okay. So here's a schedule of the 3 annual payments of $23,282 that's made by Frank. So for the first year here, period ending December 31st, 2021, the beginning balance starts off at $60,000. So that's the balance, or that's the cash that was received by Frank from the lender. Okay, so $4,800 here. As you can see here, that's the interest expense that was calculated in step one on the previous slide by taking 60,000, multiplying it by $4,800. Sorry, multiplying it by 8% to get $4,800. All right. So then you have the notes payable here. Now, before we get into notes payable, jumping over to column D here, column D shows the 3 annual cash payments that are made by Frank. So we've calculated the interest expense of taking 60,000, multiplying it by 8%. That gives us $4,800 of interest that's recorded in the first year. Jumping over to the D column here, or column D, $23,282 is the annual cash payment. So that cash payment does not change for the 3 years. So that's it right here. So once this cash payment is made, $4,800 is going to come out of that $23,000, and so whatever's left over is going to be it's going to cover the principal balance of $18,482. All right, so the ending balance of $41,518 is taking 60,000, which is the beginning balance, and it's subtracting out the notes payable of $18,482. That's where you will get your $41,518, because at the end of the day, the principal loan balance will need to be paid off. That's the focus. The interest is extra. All right, this is where the lender is actually making its money from the interest. So what you see here in this column B, interest expense here, that's interest expense to the borrower. The lender, this is revenue to them. So the lender is making this money. All right, but as the borrower, the goal is to pay down this $60,000 here. All right. So in the second year, you see here that on December 31st, 2022, the new loan balance is $41,518, which is carried over from the previous year, year one. So we have here $41,518. If you take this loan balance of $41,518, the revised loan balance, multiplied by 8%, you should get $33,221. But let me just do that real quick just to make sure. So 41,518 multiplied by 8%. Yes, you get $3,321.44 technically, but this is rounded to the nearest whole number. Okay, so this is the interest expense that's recorded in Frank's books. So again, going over to column D of $23,282, which is the cash payment that's made by Frank. You take the cash payment of $23,282, subtract out the interest expense, okay, which that's being covered with this $23,282. You get $19,961, which goes towards the principal amount, which is sitting in the notes payable account. Okay, so notice from year one and year two, more of this cash payment of $23,000 is going towards the principal amount, and less of it is going towards the interest, which is great. Okay, so once that happens, the ending balance as of year two, the end of year two, is $21,557, which is taking $41,518 and subtracting out $19,961. Okay, so third year, December 31st, 2023, the new balance of $21,557, which is carried over from the previous year, $21,557 multiplied by 8%, which is the interest expense. That gives you $1,725. Going over to column D, taking the principal, not principal, but the annual cash payment of $23,282, subtracted from interest expense, because out of that $23,725 is going to be taken from that cash payment, which means that the remaining $21,557, which is taking $23,282 subtracting from $1,725, that gives you a balance of zero, meaning that Frank paid off the loan balance in 3 years. And as you can see here, of course, in year 3, more of the cash payment here of $23,282 went towards the principal amount. And with that, less of the cash payment went towards the interest expense. So you can see a pattern here. Interest expense goes down as the year goes on, but the principal balance goes, well, it gets reduced more as the years goes on. Okay, so this is how I like to actually set up the chart to see how things work when it comes to figuring out the interest expense per year that needs to be recorded in the books, and also the notes payable that needs to be reduced per year in the books as well. So again, first start off with column A, then calculate what the interest expense is going to be in column B. What I like to do is skip over to column D, because column D shows the cash payment that's going to be made by the borrower, and that cash payment is going to cover the interest expense and also the notes payable, which is whatever's remaining after the interest expense is paid from the cash payment. All right, so let's see what it looks like in Frank's books as far as how they recorded in their books. So here's the partial general journal here. So this is to record the principal and interest on the note. So as you can see here, in the first year, 2021, interest expenses debited for $4,800. So that's increasing the balance in that account. Notes payables debited for $18,482. That's decreasing the balance in that account, because to debit a liability account, you're decreasing it. Okay, so this represents that these cash payments are reducing the principal balance that was initially recorded in the notes payable account on January 1st. And as you can see here, the cash payment was that was made in 2021 is $23,282, and that's crediting that account. Okay, so that's recognizing that, hey, a cash payment was made, and that cash payment went towards interest. Okay, this is what the lender is actually capitalizing on. They're making money off of this loan, and the $23,000 also is covering the principal balance here of $18,482 by reducing that principal balance down. Okay, because again, the goal is to get rid of that loan balance. 2022, okay, same entry as far as with the accounts that's debited and credited, but you notice the difference here in the amounts with the exception of the cash account. So cash doesn't change. Cash is going to be credited for $23,282, but out of that amount, $3,321 went to interest expense, so that's debited. $19,961 was credited, which is taking $23,282, subtracting it out by the $3,321. So the remaining gets debited to notes payable. Okay, 2023, same thing but different amounts. Except for cash, cash is credited for $23,282. Okay, out of that amount, $1,725 was debited to interest expense. $21,557, which is the difference between $23,000 and $1,725, goes towards notes payable, which is the principal balance. Okay, so this is it when it comes to long-term liabilities, specifically notes payable.